welcome back to the 251st episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top stories, including how the law school dean at Berkeley is kind of getting their butt kicked by their own decisions, how the NPR whistleblower story has been taken on by other outlets and the conversation that's brewed from that, and an interesting article talking about how we've actually made some revolutions in quantum computing and the implications that could have. And of course, we will end today with our Daily Delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive, ready to take on the day. Now, that's enough rambling from me. Let's jump into our daily debate. So, when these sort of activists come into these schools and they go after, I believe it was at USC, University of Southern California, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be 100% wrong on the exact school. It's a school in California, and the students had invited a judge, and he was basically shouted down and told, hey, we don't want you here, and the administrator didn't even apologize, and then they got lots of flack for it online, and now someone else from a school in California, this Berkeley dean, had activists come to their meeting at their house, like a little grill out, and guess what? They also had some people who were really mad. These activists decided, you know what? We're going to disrupt this whole event. And now people are sitting there like, you got what you deserved. So should we feel empathy and sadness for these people? Or do they have the best intentions at heart and they're just getting bamboozled? Or do they kind of know what they're getting into? And at the end of the day, it's kind of their fault for what happened. And I'm not saying that anybody deserves what happened to them. I'm just saying if you take a brief look at the synopsis of what these people say that they're interested in and what they want to do with their degrees, and then you presume that you're not going to be on the firing end if you don't piss them off, if you do piss them off, then maybe you should take a little bit more stock in these sort of decisions if you don't want to possibly deal with that. Or you sit there and you say, yeah, okay, I'm going to deal with it. I don't want you to disrupt anything going on here. I don't want you to do this right now, but hey, I made the decision. Let's 100% roll. Which, let's be clear, this dean actually did the honorable thing, even more honorable than I would have done, but it's okay. We'll get into that here in the article. Throw your comments in the comment section. Love to hear what everybody has to say. Let's jump into that first article that comes from National Review. So the headline reads, Law School Rot Hits Berkeley Dean Close to Home, literally. So for those of you who don't know, this basically was an event that was happening at the dean's house. They invited a whole bunch of different students, and they were having a nice little dinner together. And then the students started pressing and tried to use it as an opportunity to pressure the dean, because guess what? You've been invited to their house. I mean, you got access at this point. And if you're a person who has a political agenda and you really want to press in the rings of power and you want to embarrass them, then doing it at their own house, at their own event, is one way to definitely do it. I mean, you can't blame these people who have their political convictions for being savvy. You can't blame them for taking advantage of the opportunity. I mean, yeah, technically you can, because come on, you're at somebody's house. Be not rude, okay? Have some decency. Bring it up with them in private. But at least on a sheer strategic level, you can't blame them like, oh, we're getting access directly to this person's house. We're not just going to affect him in the office at school. We're going to affect him in front of the entire department that's coming, his wife, and it can actually have a really lasting impact. Or it could have the exact opposite impact, and maybe this dean is going to reconsider what they're doing in the future. But hey, you know what? Maybe that's just me projecting. Maybe that's what I would do, and maybe this person won't. But let's get into a little bit more of the details of what's going on here. Quote, the moral and behavioral rot at our elite law schools has hit close to home, literally, for the dean of Berkeley Law, Erwin Cherminsky. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, sir. Probably not listening to this podcast, but if you are, welcome. Sorry I mispronounced your name. On April 9th, about 60 third-year students gathered in the dean's backyard for a pre-graduation dinner. A few of the students co-opted the occasion to rant about their school's supposed support for Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza and Cherminsky's avowed Zionism. Cherminsky and his wife, Berkeley Law professor Catherine Fisk, repeatedly pleaded with these students to leave. When Fisk tried to wrest a microphone from the students leading the demonstration, the student accused Fisk of assault and refused to move, insisting that she had a First Amendment right to continue. Okay, so we're going to break this one down. First Amendment right. You are not on government property. If you were at a school that is given federal government money, grants, maybe we could see an argument there. It gets even more technical, honestly, depending on how some of the laws are written in some of these states. But you are at his private property. Now, does that mean that he actually has the ability to wrestle you for the microphone, which is me being overdramatic compared to just trying to take it from that person? You're on private property. If he owns that location, guess what? He can say, no, you can't speak on this location. You can't. Sometimes you have to actually get approval from businesses. Most of the time, you should get approval from businesses, but sometimes they'll let you off. But you should get approval from businesses if you're going to do a protest on their land. Because guess what? Private land. If you come into my house, if you come into my farm and you try to protest, you try to say, "Oh no, you're killing the cows. That's not okay. We're going to protest. We're going to, stop your processes." You're getting involved in what I do in my private time with my private property. And guess what? You cannot do that. If I say get off my land, get off my land. This professor very well could have said, "Hey, this is not how I want things to go down. I really love that you guys are talking about this. Come by my office. Don't do this here." And then if they kept persisting, you could have said, "Okay, I need you to get off my land. If you do not get off my land, I will call the police." But no, the professor has his priors. He's going to try to hear out these students. And, if it's truly based on I don't want to say compassion, but if it's good reasoning on his part, at least good internal reasoning, where I want to hear out my students, we're here to appreciate the 60 of them that are about to graduate. I want all of them to have their opinions heard. I'm sure there's some internal rationale that I could at least agree with, where he's trying to let everybody air out their opinions. But if you're disturbing the event, if this is me, if this is a majority of people, they're not putting up with this BS. And at the end of the day, one, he should enforce his right to say, get off my land. But also, he should have been put in this situation in the first place. These students are being rude and disrespectful. Guess what? I had at college, I had a college mama. So that's what we called it where I was in the South. You kind of go over to their house every once in a while. They're amazing. They love you like a kid. They give you food. You have dinner with the family. You stay around, play some games, have some wild conversations. And I didn't agree with her on everything. I didn't agree with her family on everything. The person that was staying with her, I didn't agree with her perspective on everything. It's not my job to. When I'm in their house, I'm respectful. There are some times where I said some things where I was like, "Oh, okay, hey, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that's just like a no-go policy, a no-go thing to talk about in this house." And you may be thinking, "Well, Alex, this is a college mama." The college mama was also in the administration at the school. That's why she lived so close. I could literally walk there from where I was staying in my dorm. And maybe I disagreed with some of the admin stuff. And if she brought it up, we would have a conversation, an open dialogue. But there were plenty of issues that I could have been like, "Hey, you need to pressure your people. This is unacceptable, blah, 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 blah." But I didn't, because I don't want to say, I'm not trying to make myself all moral. I would say most people are going to have the decency to say, "Oh, I've actually been invited over to their house. This is not a celebration of me alone. This is a celebration of all my classmates. And guess what? I am not going to use this as a time to put my political priors first." But no. The students, they believe that they have, as she said, it's my First Amendment right. They have the right to use this opportunity to bludgeon everybody else with their beliefs. So we laid it out. We laid out how he probably should have kicked him out. And even if he didn't kick him out, that they shouldn't have put him in the position where we would even have to consider it first. Let's go on to a little bit more of the story here. Quote, "It's hard to imagine how such an episode of increasingly common yet despicable behavior can evoke sadness. When Cherminsky, unaware that the students at his top-ranking law school act like petulant children." Was Cherminsky unaware of this fact? Quote, 6 months ago, he wrote that he was stunned when students across the country, including mine, immediately celebrated the Hamas terrorist attack in Israel on October 7th. Yet since then, across the nation, radical anti-Israel students have occupied buildings, disrupted classes, and harassed Jews and Zionists. In most cases, they have reached little more than slaps on the wrist, emboldening them to call administrators bluffs when threatening with consequences. Meanwhile, universities embracing DEI concepts have imbued them with the belief that aggregating on behalf of the oppressed is more important than basic decency. Those seen as opponents deserve to be fought at any measure necessary or by any means necessary. So, when we start to break this down, is it a actual, I don't want to say perspective, I've used that word multiple times. Is it a policy? Is it just the mindset of these administrators that these sort of people who are fighting for these social justice causes deserve to be brought in because they have a noble goal? They're obviously very passionate, and they're probably very smart people. And what I mean by that, and for some people who are going to just outright criticize that, there can be many zealots on both sides that are complete idiots. And guess what? We got to disregard them. But a lot of people who are passionate about some of these things are at least well-versed, or at least have taken some time to do some research. Whether or not you agree with how they've come about, whether or not you think that they're getting their information from the wrong place, whether you think they're just morally apprehensible, no, they can't be smart. I think that's a little bit dismissive. A lot of these people are very driven, and they have a passion, and they truly believe what they've been taught, what they've learned, and the thing that they are pursuing in their passion. And whether or not I always agree with what they're going after, these administrators are saying, okay, hey, these are the people who are active, who are passionate, who want to get out there. Let's accept them. Is that the mentality that these administrators are going through? Are they not thinking through, well, yes, these people are really passionate, and if they actually disagree with you, they may be so passionate as to put aside human decency, normal interactions with human beings, and how to go about it in a way that is not reprehensible, and in order to get their message across. Do the administrators just not think that far? Are they willing to bring it in because they actually agree with some of the perspectives? Obviously, Truminsky doesn't. He's a Zionist, and yet these protesters are obviously anti-Israel, so no, he doesn't agree with them on the basics. So it has to go beyond that. It has to be, hey, we just have to be willing to accept a whole cohort of people who believe different things. They're obviously, like I said earlier, passionate, smart, at least pursuing something with a certain amount of zeal. And sure, those are all honorable things. But the real question becomes, do you want people of that nature on any side of the aisle who are so zealous about what they believe that they're not even willing to hear out somebody else on your college campus? No, I'll be honest. If I was an administrator, no, because if that person is going to go and shut down all of everybody else's speech. Now, let's be clear, counter-protesting, I understand. Bringing a louder microphone to some of these protests or demonstrations, I also understand that. But using their own means in order to shut down, limit, restrict other people's speech, that is one thing that we can see a lot of different activists have tried. I think that is inappropriate. Also, using events that are meant to be celebratory of the entire class that are not supposed to be about you and what you see as problems, and you're being personally invited to somebody's house. Do I have to explain? Do I have to explain why that is insane? Do I have to explain why that is crazy? And when I say crazy, I don't mean like, oh, you're out there and you're absolutely crazy. It just defies so many of the norms. And I guess that's the point. They have to defy so many of the norms so that they get seen, so they get this coverage, so that they get their message across. And when you're that passionate about something, that's exactly what they do. But come on, man. Really? We can have these discussions in a civilized way. Guess what? You can actually go to a place where your free First Amendment can't be infringed, where you could be on public property. There are demonstrators who go into the Senate and I take that back, the halls of Congress. Technically, they don't go into the chambers of the House and the Senate, but they're there in like the meal halls and things like that and the other halls. And they're protesting on government property for what they believe in. Whether or not I agree with everybody, like I said before, I'm not trying to endorse anybody. I'm not saying I agree with anybody, but at least they're going about it the right way. There are other people who say it's morally reprehensible and we shouldn't even let them protest there. But at least they have enough decency to not go to somebody's private event, not even like, a private, 100-person gala like in New York where there are protesters. No, this is a private event with a dean inviting you on a personal level to come to his house. I don't understand. Maybe it's just how I was raised. Maybe other people will look at me and be like, okay, who cares? Who cares where the event is? You got to protest when you got to protest. And that's fair. But like I said before, there are channels to legitimately bring up these kind of issues you have, these different contentions about university policy and law school policy in a more private way and bring it up. Or you could even go to the media. You could go to the media and call out Treminsky there. But doing it at his house, it just... There's a certain level of decency that is broken here. And I know I've said decency so many times, but I am genuinely frustrated and genuinely, I don't want to say scared, but it makes me question where we are going. Are we going to a place where no private lives are allowed anymore? We already live in a state where a lot of our things are monitored by the government or through tech companies who can sell our data onward. Privacy feels like a very hard thing. And if you can't even have private events where people are gonna come in and completely say, no, this is my event now, I'm gonna protest here. If we can't even have the decency between people, when the companies don't have decency, the state doesn't have decency to leave us alone and give us private time where we don't have to have our political priors out there, where we don't have to be scanned as an algorithm, where we don't have to be constantly judged. If we can just have that decency to have those private spaces again, great. But I feel as though this whole idea of privacy, this whole idea of a private place where we all just have a certain level of decency, because guess what? The state ain't got decency when it's reading through your messages. The big corporations who just want to keep mining your data to get more money out of you, they don't have decency when you're doing your thing at your house. And now, even on a human level, when we're not worried about profit motives, when we're not worried about national security, when we're just trying to connect on a human level and enjoy something that all of those 60 kids and that dean is a very rare occasion. Not that many people get to go through law school at Berkeley and get out and experience that with a whole class of people, and yet you're going to even violate that. It just leaves me very fearful of where we're going as a society. But hey, I've lamped on this one enough. I'm sorry that I came out really hot. Normally I record these in the morning, so I'm a little bit groggier. And some of the other ones I record really late at night, depending on the schedule. Today I had a little bit of opening towards the middle of the day, so I'm a little bit more passionate. The caffeine from the midday hasn't really worn off yet, so sorry if I came in a little bit hot there and if I kind of put the blinders on. But I think this is a serious conversation that we need to be discussing about college campus culture, but also it does apply to a broader culture change when these people who believe in or don't believe in this common decency that we need to have between one another, that it's going to be a problem. And yes, I understand the argument about decency. Well, hey, are bombing children or provoking a war, providing supplies for war, is that human and decent? And sure, I can definitely understand that rationale. They're going to say, no, that's not decent, so I'm not going to be decent. But my question is, do you fall to the level? Do you embrace the same principle of not being decent in order to get your point across? Does that actually make you better or worse? Does that actually make it seem as though you are going to get what you want, or does it open you up to more dubious criticism and make your points fall on deaf ears? That just a criticism. Think about it if you're a person who's made it this far and disagrees with me. I think it's an interesting one. All right, so let's jump into our next article that comes from the news outlet Fox News. And obviously you can tell where the bias comes from on this one. The headline reads, NPR whistleblower essay exposed reluctance by journalists to admit mistakes, argues the Chicago editorial board. So if anybody who wasn't paying attention last week, there was a big report that came out from the NPR whistleblower who is basically saying it's all liberals now. They're perspective has been locked in a certain direction, basically anti-Trump. Anything that could support Trump is a main issue that drove people, these journalists, even if they're a little bit more, fair-minded, even if they were kind of in the middle, drove them one way or another and kind of drove them into the arms of the anti-Trump wing. Now, he does normally say it's pretty darn liberal bias, and there are other issues like racial issues, DEI, that kind of thing that also spurred this movement off to the left. But I would even argue that the more important thing here is the hatred of one particular person and the group that he has brought into the political fray, or at least the discomfort with him, that person in the group, that is actually even more important. And the reason I think that's actually more important than just saying left bias is because honestly, that point falls on deaf ears now. It's said over and over again, oh, the left bias. And everybody's like, oh, well, the Fox has right bias, and everybody else is basically left-wing bias, left-wing bias, left-wing bias. Oh, yeah, we know about it already. That falls on deaf ears at this point. Everybody already knows about it. So the part of this report that's important, that they actually crystallized their more liberal support and their unquestioning liberal support because of a man and his movement, I think that is actually more important to focus on because it shows a weakness in any journalistic institution, not just NPR, not just MSNBC, not just Fox News, not just News Nation, whatever the network may be, is that if there is a central point that one person can actually convince others, or I say a central point, a central figure even, that one person in that organization, 2 or 3 people in that organization can convince the others to hate so passionately or recognize or call them a threat to democracy, then we are on the path towards unquestioning bias that doesn't even allow for true journalistic integrity. This has been the issue for quite some time, but this just highlights it even more because the whistleblower explicitly says, and we've already known this about MSNBC, but the anti-Trump movement, no, we can't let this fascist come in and ruin democracy, how it, I don't want to say it was a brain worm, but it definitely made the people at NPR go, okay, at what point do we actually allow this to keep going on? At what point do we step in and say, no, we're going to defend democracy? Because if you actually accept the framing that Donald Trump is a fascist, that he is trying to ruin democracy, that he is going to actually undermine the crucial values of this nation, then yeah, you could come to a semi-rational, don't necessarily agree with it, a semi-rational conclusion that, hey, we need to stop him from doing that. And the reason that this is interesting is because you see this sort of crystallization, especially in the media, because Donald Trump directly attacked the media. And when the media felt that their credibility was being undermined, that means they're going to get less subscribers, less people are going to come and pay attention, so they have to go and actually look for the audience that's going to actually follow them more, which means they're chasing the progressive audience that doesn't like Donald Trump, who believes that these institutions are actually trustworthy. And anybody who was in the Donald Trump camp was like, oh, wait, I listen to NPR every once in a while, but even Donald Trump is saying it's fake news. Well, that kind of weighs on me a little bit. Anybody that is fervently Donald Trump is leaving. So in order to get more subscribers, they go to the people that are anti-Donald Trump. It's kind of a dog chasing its own tail situation. Was it that more progressives were listening to NPR, so they were chasing the audience? Was it more the fact that more progressives didn't like Donald Trump and NPR didn't like Donald Trump? There's multiple factors that go on here, but we're acknowledging it's happened. And the reason I also think to point out the fact that attacking the media was a really important crystallization point is the fact that this could very well happen on the right. If you have things like, if you have an Obama come in, you remember how he actually used the IRS to do a little bit more scrutiny, a little bit more, I don't want to use very particular words here because it gets a little tricky, but he basically was looking at nonprofits that fund different conservative or even Republican agenda items, and they were under a little bit more scrutiny from the IRS. Let's put it that way. So if you have a president who comes in and says the same thing Trump did, Fox News, fake news, News Nation, fake news, and all of these organizations start freaking out, then they could become so crystallized against that person that even when that leader did something right, even when that leader did something that would be moderate, and they could court those moderate people who liked what that president did, or at least bring that president back from the left and say, hey, you don't just have to be a left figure. You don't just have to pander to them. Middle America, right America that listens to us actually will acknowledge when you do something right. They could end up in the exact same pigeonhole. And that's why I think that this bombshell report, while it's obviously being talked about that NPR is so left, I don't think that was surprising. Getting the confirmation from the inside, sure, great. Conservatives, Republicans absolutely love that. They're like, okay, yeah, we've known it for a long time, but now we have the whistleblower report. And what I took away from it was we need to be very, very careful when we start to have anti-person, anti-organization, anti-X, anti-this absolutism. Because when you have that, you can go really far down the rabbit hole. You can go really far down the train track without looking back and saying, ooh, maybe we shouldn't keep going this way, because you get locked into that perspective. So with that said, let's jump to our final article. This one comes from Daily Costs, and the headline reads, Skirting Heisenberg's Uncertainty Principle with 19th Century Tech and a Superconducting Upgrade. I didn't understand it when I first read it. I'll be honest, I don't understand all the science still, but I think it's an interesting one. We'll get into the implications of it. Let's jump into a quote from the first paragraph. Quote, here's an interesting article that just showed up in Popular Mechanics, which could have enormous impacts on the future of quantum computing, among many other things. In new research, scientists at Aalto, with two A's, University in Finland, say they've skirted the Heisenberg uncertainty principle that underpins or undermines every experiment in quantum mechanics. The secret is an instrument called a bolometer, and using it could help scientists who continue to work in qubit-based quantum computers. So I'm gonna say, of course, I am not a quantum computing expert. I am not a physicist. I do not have the breadth of knowledge to go in here and say, yes, I understand exactly all of the mechanics and I understand everything that's going on. What exactly is a qubit? I've done research in the past. It still goes over my head a little bit. The interesting thing here about the Heisenberg uncertainty principle is the idea that the more accurately we can measure the placement of a particle, I believe is the best way to describe it. But when we're looking at a really small scale and we're trying to understand what's going on with a particle, the more we understand its movement, the less we understand its position. And the more we understand its exact position, the less we understand the movement. So it's kind of this idea where in order to actually see what's going on and to see it and capture it and know where it is exactly, we have to be so zoomed in, it's hard to see where it's moving from there. So now what they're doing is they're actually using this bolometer, and they're going to replace the normal materials with like the word, I believe, if you know who Ian is from Timcast, you'll know that he absolutely loves his carbon-based materials, and he absolutely loves the idea of having these carbon nanotubes, which is actually called graphene. I've talked about it before. It took me a little bit to actually remember what it was called, but they're going to use graphene instead of the normal component because it's actually more sensitive to distinguishing heat. So they actually make it super duper cold, basically, and they put it in there. And because it's super duper cold, any change in heat actually allows them to pick it up because, well, hey, it's a greater change than if it was room temperature. And the idea here is when particles move extremely quickly, the faster they move, the hotter they get. So if they can detect the temperature, they can tell how much that particle actually is moving. So they have an idea of what movement's like, and they can have a better idea of position. That's my understanding. How it will actually make quantum computing so much better, you have to basically be able to analyze the movement of these qubits and the placement of them in order to properly have a quantum computer work and to make it more efficient and make it more accurate when doing some sort of computing. Now, once again, I am out there I am on a limb right now, and somebody who's much more expert than I could come in and saw it off with just a few words. Nope, that's not how qubits work. So go do your own research, actually read through this article yourself. I just think it's astonishing that we're always innovating, especially on quantum computing, when we know that this is one extra layer that we need to break through when we are ascending towards processing more information. And considering we live in the information age, this sort of thing is going to be extremely crucial for the next part of infrastructure for the internet, for a whole bunch of different technologies. Because imagine a AI system that runs diagnostics, instead of doing it in 10 minutes, they could do it in 10 seconds with a quantum computer. Imagine the power of AIs on quantum computing. Then again, remember how that could possibly be the ultimate end of us if some people have their AI predictions in the right way. But hey, that's too doom and gloom. Let's move on from the doom and gloom. Let's go to our daily delight. This is how we're going to close out today. This one comes from The Independent. And the headline reads, "Orphaned baby wallabies enjoy their new home at the Perth Zoo." And these guys, they were rescued. Obviously, like it says, they were orphaned. They're without mom and dad. And they really acclimated to their area very quickly. The video, there's a few little night shots of them in the habitat. It's absolutely adorable. And if you want to check out the video here or any of today's articles, they will all be linked separately in the description. Normally, I have one link that takes you to the page. Today, I'm going to have them all linked separately. I'm still trying to figure out a solution for that. And what I actually have done now, I don't think it's the end of the world having them all separate, so you can go to the individual places that they come from. But I would hope to be able to create like a file on the website and maybe redirect you there, but we'll see. It all comes down to whether or not I'm creative enough to figure it out. So thank you for joining me for this episode of the Daily Flip podcast. If you want to check out any of the podcast content that's not here on YouTube, you can check it out on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Google Podcast, as well as Podvine. And also down there in the description, you can find the Twitter handle at Your Daily Flip, where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. So with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe. Don't die.